What could possibly be out there, rustling and lurking through those woods that we've been exploring since childhood? Welcome back to the swamp, my friends. It's good to see you made it back for another episode. Today we're going to be exploring some creepy and allegedly true stories from the deep woods. If you have a story from the woods or maybe from somewhere else and you want to share it on the show, be sure to submit your story at swampdweller.net or the email you can find in the description down below. I'd love to share your story with everyone here in the swamp. Now, without further ado, let's get into these creepy stories that'll keep you up tonight. This is a story that was relayed to me by an ex-girlfriend back in 2002 on Vancouver Island, Canada. So I'm guessing it took place sometime in the 1990s. She said that her best friend was going camping with her mom, her sister, and her other friend. They wanted a little more privacy than is offered by the provincial parks, so they decided to go down some exceptionally long, winding logging roads. People who know Vancouver Island know that these roads go deep into the Pacific rainforest, and they are very remote. Many of them are private roads that are often locked or blocked off, and you are not really supposed to be on them. Anyway, they decided that they were far enough out and found an ideal clearing near a stream. The girls had just gotten out of the car after a long ride and were stretching and preparing to unpack their tent and gear. Then, her friend looked at the end of the clearing near the woodline. There was this thick black fog the size of a person that was just hovering there. She began to scream and freak out, and the other girls ran towards her to see what the problem was, when they all claimed to have seen it too. They immediately just threw everything that they had unpacked on the ground and ran for the car. They locked the doors and sped away from there as fast as they could. As they looked back from the car as they were leaving, they saw the black fog had moved out into the main road and was traveling towards them, seemingly following them. They were all crying and panicking and accelerated as fast as they could without losing control of the vehicle. They drove back to town in silence, not knowing what to think about what had happened. A few weeks after this incident, the local news reported that a woman's body had been found on this same exact road, awfully close to where they were going to camp. The police did say the woman was a homicide victim. I am unsure of any information on if they ever identified the woman or were able to locate her killer. Her friends always wondered if this was perhaps the spirit of the murder victim they had encountered deep in the forest. We had walked out of our freshman dorm to head for the park. To both my roomies and to my surprise, I randomly lifted my head, spread my arms, and said, "There's magic in the air," which was very uncharacteristic of me. We kind of just forgot about it and headed off. In hindsight, that must have been the beginning. We walked down the street to the park, toting our guitars. Our plan was to practice for our guitar final the following day while enjoying the peace of the park. About a block ahead of us, spanning the sidewalk, was a statue of a black German shepherd lying in profile, gazing across the other side of the street. I wondered, out loud, why anyone would block a sidewalk with a large dog statue. My roomie just shrugged, apparently very uninterested in what I had to say. I slowed more and more, studying the statue. It was so odd to me. Then I realized that I saw a glint in one of the eyes, and that it was not a statue. That stopped me entirely in my tracks. It was breathing, but did not twitch an ear, nor move to glance at our approach. Though it must have heard our footsteps, it just lay there, ears erect, and pointed toward the other side of the street, eyes gazing in the same direction. I knew how dogs acted, and did not feel comfortable with this one's behavior. I had no intention of trying to step over it or facing it if it decided to turn its attention toward us. I pulled, protesting my roomie. She had never had pets and was not an animal lover. As well, affectionately, she was not the brightest bulb in the pack, to the other side of the street to continue our trek down to the park. I stared across the street at it, but could not tell what it was looking at. It never moved. When we reached the park, we sat at a picnic table and began practicing our chords. Soon thereafter, a small tabby Manx cat walked up to us. Being a cat lover, I stopped to see if it would come up to us and make friends. Instead, it began running in circles around our table, round and round, increasing speed as it ran. My mouth must have been hanging open as I watched this in complete surprise. Then it stopped, shook itself, and began running around us in the other direction, again increasing speed as it ran. What the holy hell was going on here? Even my roomie stopped playing to watch. It then, fluidly, swarmed up a tree into a branch overhanging our table and laid comfortably down, settled its little chin onto its little paws, and grazed down with its round golden eyes directly right into my eyes. It looked kind of smug. No other word to describe that look. I was stunned and could not figure out what was happening. Then I surprised myself with a thought. You've just been marked. Now, I was already uneasy after the encounter with the strange, very still shepherd, so my discomfort jumped up several notches. I told my roomie that the cat, who was still staring down at me at this point, was not behaving normally. She thought I was making too much out of it and wanted to continue practicing. She did not even glance up at the creature. I knew that any of my animal-loving friends would have been just as astonished about these incidents as I was if I could even get them to believe me. I was on my own. Dusk was approaching. I glanced across the park and immediately noticed a huge wolf-like creature skulking into some of the bushes and trees by the woods. It was canine, but did not move like a dog, nor look like a dog in the distance across the park, which was probably about 3/4 of a football field. It was enormous. I just could not believe my eyes. Now what? I stared and stared. Then, in the spot where this thing disappeared into the bushes, a figure appeared. In the twilight, I could see it was very tall, human-shaped, and I could tell that it looked like its clothes were completely tattered. My immediate thought was that it had been savaged by that wolf thing. My immediate thought was that I would have definitely heard if there was some sort of confrontation going on just outside the tree line, you know? There had been and was no sound. I watched as it shambled across the darkening park toward our table. We had been the only people in the park this entire time. It seemed to be dragging a leg. It had long, scraggly hair and long pointed fingernails on an exceptionally long finger, hanging limply at its side. That was it for me. I was suddenly terrified. A quick glance showed me that the little Manx cat was still staring down at me. I was not going to wait for the figure to reach me. I grabbed my guitar and took off, and my roomie scrambled after me, hollering. Honestly, I'm not really ashamed to say I left her behind. Upon reaching campus, I crossed a little crosswalk to head for my dorm. As I crossed, an old arthritic white dog was crossing from the other side. As we passed one another, it stopped dead, crouched, and stared right at me. Its eyes were pure white. I started to freak out more and back away from it. It moved only its head, seeming to follow me with those eyes, not moving its body from where it was crouched. Twisted, uncomfortable even. All the people around us were staring at us. A car drove up to the crosswalk, headlights now on, and began blowing its horn to move the dog. It did not budge. It just kept craning its neck towards me. My head blew out. Now hysterical, I ran the rest of my way to the dorm and crawled under my covers. I have never been the same, and only a few people have ever heard this story or even believed me. Which is so frustrating because I am a stable and honest person, and they know it. Anyway, that all happened just as I have written, and I have no answers, so if anybody here on this show might have some, please comment them down below. Also, no, I don't plan on going to investigate those woods at the park.
I had just gone on a canoeing trip with my dad and 3 other pairs of father and son. Me, my cousin Trent, my future sister-in-law's brother Luke, and a close friend of mine, Jack. These aren't their real names. The trip was a week long, and we were exhausted. My dad had got us a huge Airbnb somewhere near Minneapolis for us to spend the night before heading back to the Midwest. We arrived at the house a little before sunset, and Trent and I decided to rush into the house and pick our beds before the other 2 guys could. We picked the 2 beds in the attic, which was super clean and had all the fun things in it, like the only TV in the house and a ping pong table. Our dads had gotten us some apple pie, so we went downstairs to the kitchen to get it. When we got back upstairs, we noticed it had gotten extremely hot, so we opened all the windows and played some Monopoly to pass the time. After I had won a Monopoly, since I'm a Monopoly god, we got bored and decided to explore the house. We started observing the house a bit more closely and noticed the wallpaper throughout the entire house was a bunch of little girls. Every picture in the house was of a different little girl. We started saying the house was haunted as a joke since it gave off some creepy vibes, but nothing had happened to us, so we couldn't confirm it was haunted. We went into the kitchen and explored that a little bit. We found what we thought was the pantry and opened it. We noticed the door had a lock on it, which we thought was silly since we thought it was just a pantry. When we opened the door, we noticed that it wasn't a pantry, but actually a staircase to the basement. There were no light switches or lights at all, so we dared each other to go down there and look around. Luke went down first, and we could see him turn the corner of the stairs, and all we saw was his face go straight white. He immediately ran up the stairs and back to the attic, where he sat on one of the beds panting and just staring. He said it was really sketchy, and immediately my cousin wanted to see it for himself. So we all followed him down to the basement, and then when Trent turned the corner, his face went as equally white, and he ran up the stairs. We went after him, and he said the same thing as Luke did earlier. We also noticed all the windows had closed again, which was weird because we locked them open. I decided it was my turn to go to the basement, so I and Jack went down. I pulled my phone out as a flashlight and turned the corner. I can only assume my face went as white when I did it too. The walls were all white, and there was a sink in the center of the room with a chain dangling from it. The door at the back that led outside was bolted shut and covered in scratch marks. And the scariest part was the walls and the sink were all covered in blood. I ran upstairs panting and waiting for Jack to come after me. We waited a little bit, and Jack came up the stairs, his face dead white and panting. The scratches on the door, the blood, and the basement lock on the outside of the door, so that whatever was down there couldn't get out. More creepy stuff happened to us that night. It all probably could have been explained, so I won't include it. But the next morning when we were leaving, we noticed a list of rules on the kitchen table. They were all normal rules, like don't touch this, or this light switch is broken. But the last rule, number 9, said, under no circumstances are you to go into the basement.
Have you ever heard of the Wendigo? They say it is a monster that has the antlers of a deer and the putrid smell and looks of a rotting corpse. Legend says, in the times of the Native American culture, that during harsh times when food was little, people would resort to cannibalism, which would slowly turn you into a monster, a cryptid if you will, that stalks and lures unsuspecting victims to their death. This is the story about my encounter with this cryptic creature. The night was frigid, and I and my best friend, who I will call C for this story, decided that we were going to go boar hunting. A boar is a wild pig that is invasive all over the globe, and a few nights back, we spotted a group of them at the feeder in the back of C's pasture. So, here is a quick layout of the property. C has 2 ponds, one on the side of his house and the other in the back of his property. And in the front of the back pond, we built a hunting stand around the tree. I and C were in the stand. We were both equipped with 30-06 hunting rifles. It was close to 10 p.m., and yet we have not seen a single pig. We were getting tired by this time and began packing stuff up. I decided to take one last look at the clearing at the very back of the pasture. And until this very day, I wish I did not. On my rifle, I have an ultraviolet flashlight equipped. Animals cannot see the light being displayed. While shining the light in the brush, I noticed something unusual. It was an animal I had never noticed before, or in my case, ever seen in my life. This creature seemed to be freakishly tall, considering that all I could see were its bright yellow eyes about 7 to 8 feet in the tree line. This utterly confused and terrified me. Without thinking, I fired a round at it, missing, which only seemed to agitate whatever this creature was. Because as soon as I shot this thing, it bolted towards us, sprinting on its hind legs. Now, it was probably roughly 300 yards or so from the clearing to the stand, and while it was sprinting toward us at an almost impossible speed, considering it was zigzagging, I managed to fire another shot and hit it mid-mass. This seemed to stop it, because it fell on the ground and started screaming this metallic screech that just about deafened me. In shock, it stood back up and got the hell out of there limping, but still incredibly fast back into the woods. I and C, not knowing what the heck just went down, or what we should even do, left everything in the hunting stand and booked it back to the house, and made sure to lock everything that could be opened. We did not sleep much that night, and never felt safe staying out past dark outside ever again. The year 2003 might as well have been an alternative reality in the pages of a book, or on screen in a film. It felt normal for a 14-year-old to disappear into the woods on foot until sunset. Bikes and skateboards were infinitely more common than cell phones, and the world just felt like a simpler place, like it had room to breathe. Bigger, even. Everything was bigger. And the place where the horizon skimmed the land was always unknown. Unknown was a promise to draw you in, and in that same whisper, set a chill in your bones as it teased countless dark and murky frontiers. Every Friday, I would go to a local skating rink with my friends, Connor and Tom. The rink was the only place open after 8 p.m. in this little Connecticut town that locked its doors and dimmed its lights at sunset. The charm had already worn off. The skating rink smelled constantly of old socks, and we had struck out with every girl in the building, and Cotton Eye Joe had been so overplayed we didn't care where he came from or where he went. That is when the idea hit me. There's no one keeping us here, and our parents are not coming until 10 p.m. Let's explore outside in the woods. Connor and Tom were eager to follow me through the unguarded doors, and the high school sophomore behind the admission counter did not look up once from her magazine. We were free to roam the town, the silent town in this sleepy little woods. Despite a slight blue cast of summer twilight still laying a blue haze on everything around us, everything was pretty dark. After a little deliberation about where to go, we had nearly settled on a nearby gas station with the ambition to load up on candy. That is until Tom suggested we check out the woods. After all, we could get candy at any time, but these woods were far from our usual backyard stretch of trees. These were untouched lands, waiting to be seen for the first time. Eagerly, we made our way towards the place where the pavement ended and the trees began. The expanse of forest was so dense and so neatly juxtaposed to the parking lot and the skating rink, It almost felt as though the parking lot was a terminal, the cracked gravel of our jumping off point to another world. As we were taking our first steps off the pavement, I looked behind me to see if we were being watched. Connor and Tom were already fading into the dark of the trees, but I wanted to be sure we were not being watched or followed. Small towns like this have real eager cops, bored to stone and ready to spring to life at the slightest disturbance. No cops, no witnesses to trespassing. I noticed something, however. An illuminated window in the concrete of the building we exited from. This was not part of the skating rink, but rather situated behind it. An apartment of some kind, a residence in a strange location maybe. I had seen the occupant before. It was an elderly woman, built like she had a scarecrow in her family tree, and I always wondered how she managed to sleep on weekends with the hum and thump of the rink insulated by only a few feet of concrete. More than that, I wondered why, in this sedated little town, did she have bars over her windows, and of all things a metal shutter over her front door. I turned into the woods and ran to Connor and Tom before they could get too far ahead of me. Connor was easy to catch, as he had a doctor's penlight in his hand, shining the most ineffective circle of light on the ground ahead of him. I remarked that we still had enough light from the blue gaze to see ahead of us, and he might as well save it. After all, our expedition had been impulsive, and the penlight would be our only beacon once that last light of day was truly gone. "Where's Tom?" I asked. "Dunno. He drifted out of sight. Maybe he went ahead." I rolled my eyes and replied, "He's hiding nearby. The guy sees in the dark like a cat, and I know exactly what he's up to. He's going to jump out and scare us the second we let our guard down." Connor groaned. This was Tom's game, and he knew it was as well, and I just didn't want to be a part of it. I yelled out, "Quit screwing around, Tom. We're going to go ahead without you." We got no reply, as I expected. Connor and I marched forward. The trees were dense, but there were clear spaces to walk in between them. Slowly, the whoosh of passing cars of the road behind us fell away, as the lights from the parking lot did as well. 15 minutes into this adventure had not revealed any more sightings of Tom, and we had not heard the rustle of his footsteps or the muttering under his breath that typically preceded one of his ambushes. I became less occupied with him as we progressed deeper into the trees. There was a distinct feeling out here, an awareness not felt in other places. Do not stand in the shopping mall or at McDonald's and soak in the reality of your surroundings. Something about this canopy of tree, the ever-receding columns, dissolving into distant black, made your senses vibrate. The urgency of being a trespasser was ever present, although we were trespassing on no one's land as far as I knew. It was a seldom felt combination of being an adventurer, but also somehow of being prey. The second notion was becoming more intense, and I did my best to push it back out of my thoughts. As Connor and I pushed forward with timidness that was increasing every moment, something suddenly crashed into my thoughts. I felt like I was repeating something I had done before. This brand new place felt awfully familiar, as if I were recalling a dream or a favorite place I'd visited often in childhood. I was overcome with an intense deja vu. I did not say anything to Connor as I noticed the light in his hand casting a trembling circle on the ground ahead. I knew he was scared, and I did not want to feed his anxiety. Connor stopped, and I stopped along with him. He stammered just enough that I expected him to make a plea to return to the parking lot, but his words stopped me just as suddenly as he had. "Dude, I just got major deja vu." I had not said a word to Connor about mine, and he was clearly rattled by whatever it was he was feeling. I still did not want to scare him, and so I laughed and made some half-hearted joke about it. There was something interesting ahead, and I wanted to see it. A shimmer of white between the trees just a few yards ahead. There were a few, still, and standing tall, like pillars between the tree trunks. With a few persuasive words, Connor walked side by side with me to investigate. We cleared the sprawling tangle of trees into a clearing. The first thing we encountered since the woods was this. This feeling of deja vu, which was growing stronger. I looked to the farthest horizon to see a sharp hillside climbing ahead of us. Just above the hillside, I felt the source of my deja vu. I cannot seem to explain it any better than that. I felt like I was a magnet, and my opposite magnetic pole was just at the top of that ridge. Night had settled enough now that this hill was just a sprawling black swell on the horizon. Something more captivating was just in front of us, however. There were stark white trees stripped of their branches, bark shredded like tissue paper, rigid and tall in the clearing. "It's like they were struck by lightning," Connor said, his voice drifting with uncertain wonder. I did not know enough to comment, but I knew this was abnormal. Before I could take another step, I saw a black mass curled up beneath one of the trees. The Xerox white of the trunks was invisible in the night, but all the other details around them, Connor included, were glazed in darkness. The tiny spot of Connor's penlight was waning a faint orange on the ground. It provided nearly no assistance. I stepped back and pointed out the shape on the ground. "Look," I explained in a hissy whisper. "It's Tom. He thinks he's got us." I whispered a hushed plan to Connor. Tom thought he was slick, curled up in his black trench coat. Well, the black-clad aspiring vampire was not getting the glory tonight. Connor arranged with me as I explained that we would nonchalantly stroll by Tom, acting as if we had not seen him. I knew Tom would leap up at us and scream the moment we turned our backs to him, and so the plan was to immediately whip around and tackle him when he launched his assault, screaming right back in his face. Connor walked in step with me, ready to deploy. We walked closer to the black mass. It was knee-height or so, and shook subtly as we walked closer. These next few steps would take us by it, and we were ready. As we approached, it was just over a yard to our left. I slowed my pace and just barely kept it in my peripheral vision. It began to rise, and rise, and rise. I am frozen. I do not know when I stopped. I didn't consciously choose to. I just seized. The mass unfurls and stands taller than Tom ever could. There is no indication of clothing. There is no face. There is only movement of black shapes, fluid and smooth in their movement. Maybe legs? Long things that look like arms? I do not know. It is tall, and it is way too tall. It is standing on two legs now, and it's just so tall. I am cranking up my neck. I have to look up. I do not know if Connor is still near me, and I'm not thinking clearly. I'm just reacting. Is it a deer? Why do I think it is a deer? It's definitely not a deer, but the legs are knobby and thin like one. But it's much too tall. A protrusion, maybe a head mass, sits on top of a swaying shape. Like the hill beyond us, the body in front of me is silhouetted in black. Is it a different kind of black? It almost feels like it's darker than black. Suddenly, this thing leans forward onto its arms. It is too close for comfort. It is too close to us now. I still cannot move. It is on 4 legs. Maybe? Are these legs? What is even happening? It bounds off into the woods in the opposite direction, towards the hills. Maybe it's a dog? It's not a dog. My brain is handing me pictures to recognize what I am seeing, and I must reject each image. It stands on 2 legs, but it runs on 4. It has a head. It is thin, or just looks thin because it is tall. The appendages seemed strong, too strong to be frail, but wiry all the same. Connor is still here. Connor is calmly telling me that we have to go. I am coming back from the shock. Reality is the outlet, and I am the fork. Everything surges all at once. Connor is right, and my head pivots in all directions, expecting an attack from an angle. Or maybe I am just so completely unprepared for something like this, I'm simply looking for something to do with my body. Connor is steady, but the kind of steady that keeps balanced on a needle over shards of glass. I nod. I remember Connor carries a pocket knife. I asked him to take it out, and he does. We run as fast as we can, and we stumble and drift over roots and rocks. Thin branches tear at our faces. My eyes, my mouth, all my exposed skin is flecked with bits of dirt and tree bark. Connor is not as fast, or maybe he is just more careful. I pause for him, he catches up, and we take a moment to be sure we are making a straight dash to the parking lot. Not so distant twigs crack, methodical and frequent snaps and tiny crunches, the sound of something moving. It was not us. We are stood still, and only a dozen or so yards away, something is moving. The brush is a shading of black smattered over more distant, indistinct black shapes, but is rustling fiercely enough to be visible even in this inkwell. Running resumes, without a word spoken. The possibility of being snatched from behind continues to hammer through my brain. My shoulders and back tingle with the expectation of being gripped and pulled suddenly. Through the trees ahead there's light. This is enough to abandon all caution and speed toward the glow without any care that may be underfoot or hanging in the branches. In this burst, there are no obstacles. We are fired from the tree line into the parking lot as if it was from a cannon. Tom is there. Sitting on a concrete slab, a girl sits next to him. We have seen them kiss before. That feels like it will never matter again. We pace and shiver in the glow of the parking lot. The drone of the bulbs above us feels like a guardian, as if I had raised the drawbridge and left the hordes outside the gates. It felt like such a fragile comfort, and perhaps nonsensical, all mental. What we saw. Would it care about the light? Would it just burst from the trees and do what I expected it to do? I don't know. This is one of the most unexplainable things I've ever experienced in my life. I took Tom away from his slim, brown-haired companion in lowrider jeans. I told him in the safety of the front lot what we had seen. He did not believe me. He mocked me. He said he got bored of trying to scare us and came back to the rink 5 minutes after we entered the woods. I had no retort. I was not clever or aggressive. I just wanted to get in my mom's SUV and get away from this place. Connor rode home with me. We attempted small talk with my mom, and she mistook 14-year-old shell shock for being exhausted by a long night of roller skating. As we pulled out, I looked one more time at the strange home behind the rink. The iron bars over the windows and the shutters over the doors. Nearly 17 years later, the rink has long since burnt down in a fire. The fire took everything, and only a flat lot now remains. For all of my teenage years, I couldn't have stayed out of the woods, even if you paid me. This encounter was not the only one I would have in the woods of Connecticut. In my early 30s, the world has gotten much smaller, and the horizon seems closer and more mundane every day. Maybe we have chased the specters away as we stripped every mystery to the bone. Maybe older eyes just do not see what younger eyes can. Maybe we cluster around little boxes of light for a reason, and the isolation of the dark remains as hungry as it ever was. Thanks for listening to these creepy and allegedly true deep woods stories sent in by viewers just like you. If you have a story that you would like to share in a future video, whether it's a story from the deep woods or somewhere else, be sure to submit your story at swampdweller.net or the email you can find in the description down below. I'd love to share your story with everyone here in the swamp, and stories like yours that help keep this show going. If you enjoyed these stories, please be sure to hit that like button, as it helps me out a ton in the algorithm. The more likes this video gets, the more YouTube promotes it to fresh new faces. If you're new to the swamp, why not join us, hit that subscribe button, and be sure to turn on notifications to never miss a new video, as I upload them almost every single day, and all things natural and supernatural. If you're not aware, you can download and bring your favorite Swamp Dweller scary stories with you everywhere you go. You can download those for free on iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher Radio, and just about everywhere else you find your favorite podcast online. Much love, and appreciation to my friend over from the Project Imminent Death channel. They read story number 3 today, and it was very, very helpful. If you guys enjoyed their voice, please be sure to check out their channel, as they upload pretty cool scary story videos. And, well, we can always use more scary stories, can't we? You might be hearing a few more guest readers and videos more often while I'm dealing with some gallbladder and stomach issues. Recently, it's just been causing a lot of pain and making it very hard for me to be on top of recording without making myself sound different or altered. So if you can show them some appreciation, that would be great. Thank you guys for all the well wishes you've been sending me on social media, and I will do my best to be back to 100% soon. This shouldn't affect the uploads. I'm still going to be uploading just about every single day for you guys. Anyways, enough about that. I'll see you guys soon with another creepy video.